a completely logical thing from people who do essentially live those lives, who probably haven't actually competed in sports. I mean, you'll notice that female athletes tend to be opposed to this because they tend to be completely aware of the fact that there are huge differences in performance between male and female athletes. But for people...
Well, you can usually mob them into silence, though.
Yeah, some of them are brave enough to say so, many of them, yeah, as you say. But many people who don't really do sports, who don't live very physical lives, may be genuinely quite oblivious to this fact, because that seems to be the promise of technology, that it erases these differences. I don't think that it does. I mean, not only because we don't yet have artificial wombs, we still reproduce the old-fashioned way, and I think are likely to for the foreseeable. I don't think artificial wombs are just around the corner. I think actually they're a spectacularly difficult technology to develop. And also because we still have the same brains, essentially, that our Stone Age ancestors did. We spent 95% of our species history as hunter-gatherers. It is humanity's first and most successful adaptation. And I think that we can't, no matter how intelligent we are, no matter how desperately we try, I think it's very, very hard to erase those differences at the psychological level. And the response, interestingly, that I've had to this book since it was published is obviously a hugely controversial title. The whole premise is hugely controversial. But interestingly, I haven't had nearly as much criticism as I thought I would. And I've actually had positive reviews, even from left-leaning outlets and so on. I got an amazing review in The Observer, I think it's because actually an enormous number of women across the political spectrum who have been offered this promise of you can live just like a man, you can have sex just like a man, they're profoundly miserable. And they do recognise that actually deep down, that promise is an empty one. And I think there's the emotion that I've had most often from readers is just a sense of relief that someone is saying it and that it seems as if there's now permission to say it, because I think that the effort of trying to pretend that men and women are the same is ultimately ruinous to both sexes.
Yeah, well, you see this weird phenomenon emerging on the left in particular, and I think it's particularly rife in university campuses, where you get a combination of compassion and low conscientiousness and high openness driving a particular political mindset. And so the compassion means, well, we're going to accept everyone, and the low conscientiousness means, well, we're not bound by anything approximating duty, and the high openness means, we're creative and curious about every form of potential self-expression. And then that produces this idea that all sexual drive, you have a chapter in your book called Not All Desire is Good. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. There's this absolute clamoring insistence that every form of sexual desire and behavior is to be valued, celebrated, and promoted, and that if you dare oppose that, there's something immoral about the opposition. So that's merely a consequence, let's say, of your bigotry. And you pointed out in your book that you often get artistic types like Andre Gide, let's say, and left-wing intellectuals pushing for full sexual freedom. And some of that's high openness and some of that's low conscientiousness, that's for sure. But then there's a kickback that's really interesting to me, because it's the same radicals possessed by exactly the same set of ideas who make a very radical counterclaim. And the counterclaim is something like, well, every form of sexual behavior must be celebrated and is nothing but a testament to the ever-blossoming range of human freedom. But every form of sexual interaction between particularly a young man and a young woman is so dangerous right to its core that there's nothing more important than full consent. And that consent has to be documented verbally and maybe even beyond verbally, formally, for even interactions that were once as casual, let's say, as dancing. And so at Princeton University, for example, there was a push to make men ensure that even when they're dancing with a girl who agreed to dance, that it was incumbent upon them multiple times during the dance to ask verbally to ensure that that once established consent was still continuing. Now, if you weren't being cynical about that, you might say, well, that's a stumbling attempt to something approximating awake politeness, because if you have any sense, when you're dancing with someone, one of the things you actually want to know is, do they really want to be doing it? But it's very peculiar to me and illuminating that this insistence on negotiated contract for every step of a potentially sexual interaction is being insisted upon not by Christian apologists for traditional morality, but by the same radicals who are out there dancing 3/4 naked in the street in their dog costumes and insisting that, every bit of sexual expression is to be lauded.
My suspicion with what's going on there, with this rise of sort of
With the start of the new year upon us, what better time than now to start building a habit of prayer? Just like physical exercise, daily spiritual exercise is critical to your well-being, especially in a world where attacks on faith and religion are happening all around us every day. Hallow, the #1 Christian prayer app in the US and the #1 Catholic app in the world, helps you maintain a daily prayer routine. It's filled with studies, meditations, and reflections, including the #1 Christian podcast, The Bible in a Year. Download the app for free at hallow.com/Jordan. You can set prayer reminders, invite others to pray with you, and track your progress along the way. Make this year your year for spiritual growth and peace. Get an exclusive 3-month free trial at hallow.com/Jordan. That's hallow.com/Jordan.
a bureaucratic attitude to sex, shall we say? This idea of asking for consent at every stage and so on. I mean, the funniest example, which I mentioned briefly in the book, is an idea cooked up by some university students that you would sign a contract before you had casual sex, and you'd take a photo of the pair of you with your contract and so on. And the joke obviously is, why not get dressed up in a big white dress? Why not invite all your friends? It's this sort of reinvention of marriage. I think I think that's basically what is going on.
We're married for the day. That's the contract.
I think what's going on with this reintroduction of these new rules post Me Too is that complete sexual freedom is not actually a sustainable system. And what we've had for many centuries, millennia, up until the 1960s really, is a very